continue this mission of reaching the world for the honor and glory of Jesus Christ. You know, in 1967, so when the ministry was birthed, Pastor Sonny pioneered the very first Victory Outreach Church in East LA, in East Los Angeles. You know, he started taking in drug addicts and prisoners, ex-cons. He started bringing them into his home and discipling them and working with them. And then he began to see the need that they needed a church, that there was going to have to be a church. He was working previously at the Teen Challenge Center, and when he was reaching drug addicts and discipling them and getting them clean, he would try to plug them into churches there in the LA area. And the pastors began to say, don't bring me those kinds of people here, because if you bring those types of people, then all my good people are going to leave. So Pastor Sonny found a burden. I have to open up a church, and God spoke to him to open up a church for drug addicts and their families. For drug addicts and their families. And for those of you that were here on Tuesday, you guys heard the story that the very first Victory Outreach Church wasn't called Victory Outreach. It was called, they would call it the Addict Church, the Drug Addict Church. And they referred to him as God's junkie. That he was God's junkie. But he continued to work, he continued to build. And from that little church in East LA in 1967, began to grow and grow and grow. Years later, as the years would pass by, I can only talk about our family branch, because we have a big family tree. And our branch, the reason that we're here right now, I know me speaking personally for me and my wife, was because in 1974, Pastor Sonny sent a young couple to the city of San Bernardino by the name of Cal and Tati Almaraz. And they went and they opened up a home right there in San Bernardino, and then a church was birthed right there in the city of San Bernardino. And years later, they reached a young gang leader from the city of Colton by the name of Rick and his wife Jeannie. And they reached them, Pastor Cal and Tati, they worked with them, they went to the ranch, and God delivered Pastor Rick from heroin addiction, from gang violence. And then a few years later, just 4 or 5 years later, Pastor Cal released him first to go to Brawley, California. And after about a year there, the door opened for Chicago. And Pastor Rick and Jeannie went and pioneered that work there in Chicago in 1984. And 5 years later, 1989, when another young man, a young teenager was running the streets right there in South Colton, right there in the park, right there doing up to no good, getting kicked out of school, getting arrested, just in trouble all the time. Pastor Rick was sent back from Chicago into San Bernardino, and he began to dispatch street teams into the city of Colton, right there in my neighborhood. And that's where I began to hear the gospel. That's where I began to hear that there was hope. Then I started seeing older homeboys of mine give their life to the Lord, family members of mine going to the ranch. And it was the beginning there where a few years later, in 1992, I found myself in the Victory Outreach Men's Home, and I never looked back. And that has been my testimony, that God saved me, God delivered me in the men's home. God took away addiction. God took away the urge to drink, to smoke, to hang out, and do all kinds of craziness. God interrupted my miserable life, and it was all because of a couple that had a vision, that God spoke to them to open up a church for drug addicts and their families. And I can only speak on our family branch because about 18 years later, that young couple, a young couple named Alex and Tina, was sent over here to Victorville, and we continued that vision. We continued to see lives changed. If you look around, you can see men and women that have been touched through this ministry, and it's only because of a man and a woman that said yes to God, a man and a woman that said yes